Hey guys, so it is August 21st, 2018. Is that right? I've been saying 2017 for like 6 months now. Um, I'm always like a year behind whatever is going on. But it's August 21st. It is approximately 3 o'clock in the morning, and exactly 8 years ago today, um, maybe to the minute, we're not sure, my youngest son died in his sleep. Honestly, except for some places kind of here and there along the way, I've never really sat down and talked about it with people that I don't know. My close friends knew, some of them were there as it was going on, but it's not something that I've actually sat down and had a discussion about. Child death is not something that people talk about often. It is very much a taboo subject and has been from the beginning. I mean, since the day he died, people have been kind of tiptoeing around that, and I do feel like it's very isolating. Losing a child is very isolating, and we do reach that point where we feel like nobody wants to upset us or hurt us, so they're just not mentioning it at all. When in reality, like we really want to talk about it sometimes. But you also don't want to be the person who's always bringing up their dead kid, because there's no way to like dampen a mood than to start talking about your child's death. Now, I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. It's a connective tissue disorder. We did not know that at the time. I also have a Chiari malformation, which basically means that my brain hangs down into my neck and it cuts off the CSF flow, which apparently like is really important to have. You need that flow. What we didn't know at the time is that pregnancy, especially labor and the hormones that are released during labor and the pushing and the contractions, can actually make EDS and Chiari malformations worse. Now, like I said, we didn't know I had this when I was pregnant with him. We knew I had a bad pregnancy, but we really just thought it was bad luck. I got one thing after another. But in the days leading up to his birth, I was feeling worse and worse and worse. And then I had the placental abruption. And usually with preeclampsia, once the child is born, that's kind of the cure. You do your blood pressure begins to regulate itself again, the swelling goes down, and that's the main way to get over preeclampsia is to give birth. But I never got better. In fact, 48 hours after I had him, I was still swollen, and I wound up having to get a blood transfusion a week after he was born. I mean, I was pale, I was sick. Uh, I never improved throughout his, 2 months that he was here. I never really got better, and that actually plays into his death. That night, I was feeling really bad. I had all week. My mom and my husband, Pete, they were taking care of him when I couldn't. And ordinarily, I would stay up with him during the night. I would work, and I had like a cradle brought up next to my laptop where I could sit there and rock him and feed him and stuff and still work. And he would be right there by me. And that's normally what I would do. But that week, I was just feeling awful. I was in a lot of pain. I was exhausted. I was swelling up again. I felt like I was losing my mind. So the night that he died, I was going to set up like I usually do, but I was feeling rotten, so Mom and Pete told me to go to bed. And they said, and Pete said, you can get up with him during the night when he needs a feeding and changing. You can do that, but you can at least get in a few hours of sleep here. And I said, okay, well, just wake me up when you get ready to come to bed. And I went to sleep. Um, we were supposed to go to a book signing that next day. So, and Pete was going to stay home. So I was going to get up, get the kids dressed, get me dressed, and Mom and I were going to take the kids up to Frankfurt. I think we had to be there around 1 or something. I woke up, I can't remember the time now, 9, 10. It felt late. When I opened my eyes and I saw the sunlight, something felt wrong. The house was too quiet. And I looked at the time and I was like, man, like I was up all night. Was Pete up all night? No, there's no way he was up. He'd been up the night before. He barely had any sleep. So I raised up and I thought, I bet Toby is down the hall crying for his bottle. And and maybe Pete can't hear him. So I got up and I went down the hall, and our office had a bed in it. It was the office, but it was big enough that we were able to move the spare bed in there too. We had a guest room, but we turned that into Toby's room, so we just took the bed and moved it in the office. And I went to to his bedroom and I looked in the crib and he wasn't there, which was normal because he did usually sleep in that cradle where he could be by me, the laptop. And so I went across the hall to the office and I opened the door and I saw Pete on the bed asleep. And the cradle was probably about 10 feet away. And I saw Toby's blanket in it. And I thought I heard something. I thought I heard a rustle or something. And I was like, oh, really need to take a shower. I'm not going to walk over there and wake him up because then he'll really be up and then I won't be able to shower. So, and then I changed my mind altogether. I'm like, you know what? I bet he's downstairs with my mom because sometimes Pete would hand Toby over to mom too at night. Like, I bet they didn't want to wake me up because they knew I was sick. So, mom's down there with him, and in that case, he's fine. It's okay. So, I didn't go all the way into the bedroom. I turned around, gently shut the door, just in case, and then I took a shower. And I was in the shower quite a while. And I got out and I combed my hair. My gosh, the house is still quiet, like everybody's still asleep. So I took the time to put on some makeup, something I had not done in like 4 months. I then went into Sam's bedroom. He was 3 at the time, and I woke Sam up. I got his clothes and I took him downstairs and I set him on the couch and I turned on the TV. I brought him a snack. And at that time, I, I started feeling like something was wrong. I had been up close to an hour and there were no sounds in the house. There was nothing. And I don't know that I started panicking, but I did get that little niggling feeling in my head like this house is just too quiet. So I went over to my mom's room and we had a really, really big house too, I should say. The house was over 4,000 square feet. We were all spread out from each other. I mean, it took a good 3 minutes to walk from one end of the house to the other. It was a big house. But I went to my mom's room and I opened the bedroom door expecting to see her and Toby. And she was in bed by herself, asleep. And as soon as I saw that she was alone, I knew. I knew something was really, really wrong. Because I had been up a long time and not only had nobody woken me up during the night to feed him, but nobody was up. And I just stood there in the door. And I said, Mom, where's Toby? And she raised up and she looked around and she said, I don't have him. And I turned around and I didn't run up the stairs, I walked. And it really long staircase, really long hallway. But it seemed to take forever to get there. And I got to the door, still didn't hear anything, and I kept thinking the whole way, like, he's gonna cry, something's gonna happen. But it didn't. And I opened the door, and this time I walked all the way into the room, which I didn't earlier. And I saw him, and he was clearly dead. And it was obvious that he had been dead for a while. I don't know how to explain it without being really graphic. But his coloring was bad. His coloring was bad and his mouth was open. And when I touched him, he was really, really cold. I don't know if I screamed. If I screamed Pete's name or if I screamed Toby's name. I don't know. But Pete woke up. And when he saw Toby, he screamed too. And I picked him up and I put my mouth over his nose and over his mouth. And I started doing CPR and doing the compressions on his chest because I went through infant CPR training. I knew how to do that. But there was nothing. There, I mean, it was like doing it to a doll. I didn't know where my phone was. And I looked for my phone and I screamed at Pete to get his phone, but Pete was in shock. Pete just kept screaming Toby's name. So I jumped up and I ran down the hall and I ran down the stairs and I ran into Mom's room and she was brushing her teeth and I stood there in the door and I just yelled, "He's dead, he's dead." And she turned around and said, "Who?" And I couldn't even say his name. She didn't know if it was Pete or if it was Sam or. And I turned around and ran back up the stairs and she was right behind me. You know, Mom's disabled and she can barely walk, but she was right on my heels. And when she ran in the room and she saw him, she said, "Oh my God." And Mom called 911 and I talked to him. And Mom started doing CPR. And I remember getting so mad at the dispatcher because I said he died. He died in his sleep. And they're like, they were just going through the protocol, but I wanted an ambulance. Like they needed to send somebody now. And she kept telling me to open his mouth and see if there was anything he could have choked on. But I knew he hadn't choked on anything. He was asleep. It was only on formula. He wasn't on food. But I stuck my finger down his throat anyway, just in case. And they kept telling me what we already knew, and I just kept screaming, "Send an ambulance." And then the woman goes, "Did you move him to a flat surface?" And I screamed at her and I said, "You didn't tell us to do that." So Mom picked him up and I ran over to the desk and I pushed everything off the desk and she laid him down and we kept up the CPR. At some point, Pete left the room and he went outside. And I looked out the window and we had a balcony and I looked out the window and I saw Pete and he was standing down there in the front yard in the middle of the yard and he was holding Sam in his arms and Pete was just standing there screaming. And I couldn't hear him, but I could see him. He said he had gone down there to wait for the ambulance and to show them how to get in. And when I saw the ambulance coming up the hill, I ran down the stairs and I met him in the kitchen and then I took him up the. They were following me, and we all ran. There were two paramedics and then me, and we ran up the stairs, and they ran ahead of me into the room, and they picked Toby up, and they turned around and ran right out. And I followed them to the back door, and one of the guys looked at the other guy, and he said, "Is this the mother?" And he said, "Yes." And they just grabbed me by the arm and threw me into the back of the ambulance, and we took off. And there were only two of them. It was just the driver and then the one in the back, and he needed to intubate Toby. And because they didn't have an extra set of hands, they had to use me. So they took the tube and he put it in his mouth and he told me to hold it, but I was shaking so hard it fell. It fell on the floor. And I picked it up. I can't put it in his mouth now. It's got dirt on it. I was afraid he'd get sick. He put it back in his mouth, and I sat there and I held it, and then he hooked him up, to the monitor, and for just a second, the line went up and down. I thought, oh God, he's not dead. I'm wrong. It'll be okay. And then it got flat again. And, we lived about 20 minutes from town, but I think we made it there in less than 10. It was all really, really fast. But going down the main road, we pulled over to the shoulder. They had called in another rescue worker, and he was following us in his pickup truck. And we all stopped on the side of the road so that he could jump out of his truck and jump in the ambulance and help us because they needed that other set of hands. But I was pretty much useless. I was trying. And we all knew he was dead. They didn't have to do what they were doing. I've learned now from other parents that sometimes they don't even call the ambulance. Sometimes they just call the coroner. But these men were really trying. They were trying so hard that I thought maybe it would be okay. I, I looked up at one point at one of the men and I said, "Is there any hope?" That didn't even sound like me. I don't talk like that. And he said, "Ma'am, there's always hope." But he looked so sad when he said it, and by his voice, he was very kind. The way he said it was very kind. And then I knew there wasn't. And we got to the hospital, and we ran in. There other people were coming in too, but we pushed past them. And they took them straight to a room, and they had me sit outside in the hall. Somebody must have brought me a chair, and I sat there at the nurse's station. And just minutes later, wasn't long at all, just minutes later, the doctor came out and looked at me and said, "I'm sorry, we just couldn't do anything." And then he left. And then they just left me there by myself. And I just sat there and cried. It seemed like forever before Mom and Pete and Sam got there. When they walked in the door, Pete was carrying an elbow blanket. And when he walked in the door and he saw me, I just shook my head. And Pete just stopped. He said, "Oh my God." The, the nurses found Sam some paper and some crowns, and they took him out in the waiting room to, there's a private room, where doctors can talk to families, and they set him up in there. We were there for hours, and I didn't see Sam one time. I mean, the nurses and the hospital staff just completely took over watching him. And they let us go in the room with Toby, which I have since learned is also rare. Normally, that happens. The parents are immediately under suspicion and they're not allowed to be with their child, but they let us go in and shut the door. And I said, "We need to call Karen," who was one of my good friends. And Mom said, "I already did. I called Karen. She's on her way." And we sat there by Toby. He was wearing this really cute little colorful summer sleeper. It was blue and it had a little puppy dog on it. And it was so surreal to see these really bright, cheerful colors and to watch his body change. the coroner was up on the mountain. Tony was up on the mountain, and it took him a few hours before they could contact him and he could come down into town. And we stayed with Toby the whole time. And he started turning blue with big purple splotches that look like bruises, but it was lividity. And at some point, these little drops of blood were coming out of his nose. And it made me so mad that he was dead. And bad things just kept happening to him, and I saw that blood on his face. So I got a paper towel and I just sat there and I kept wiping it off. The police came in the room and they talked to us. And we told them what had happened, and the police said, we're probably going to investigate this as SIDS. I knew all about SIDS. A week before Toby died, one of my Facebook statuses was, I have an unnatural fear of SIDS. Always had. I did with Sam too. It's one of the reasons why I stayed up with him at night. And eventually the coroner came in, and when he walked in and he saw him, he looked at him and he said, well, bless his little angel heart. I couldn't cry. I was trying to cry, but I couldn't. I mean, I felt like I was watching a movie. It felt like something you see on TV, and I was just watching a movie. It didn't feel real at all. I didn't feel like me. I felt like I was out of my body watching me. Somebody, I don't know who, can't remember, came in and asked me if I wanted to donate his organs. So I had to get on the phone with the organ donor people, and I was on the phone for 45 minutes, and the whole time a police officer stood there beside me. And I had to answer the dumbest questions, like how many cigarettes did he smoke a week, and how much alcohol did he consume, and a few times I almost cried, like my voice broke, but eventually I just got mad, and I shouted at him. He was just a baby, he didn't smoke or drink. The policeman kind of laughed. But then I started actually crying, and he stood there and just kept handing me tissues. And when I got off the phone, he shook his head and he said, I hate that people have to do that. I don't know why they make you do it so soon, but I guess it was to get that process started, you know. I went out to the waiting room, and when I walked out, there was a group of people I didn't know, and I heard somebody say, there she is. And these women came up to me and they said, the old woman said, they brought my husband in behind your little boy. Is it okay if I pray? And you know me, I mean, I'm not religious at all. I barely believe in God. But I said, yeah, it's okay. And she stood there and she put her arm on me, her hand on my shoulder, and said, Heavenly Father, please bring her little boy back to her. And I thought, oh my God, she doesn't know he's dead. And I didn't want to tell her. I didn't want her to feel bad. I know it's stupid. You have no control over any of this, over what you're thinking. It gets weirder. But I went to another room and I started calling people and telling them, I need you to come over. I called our friend Ashley, who is more or less the children's godfather. And I called him and I said, Ashley, Toby died. And I need you to come to the hospital right now to be with Mom. Ashley's husband had died almost exactly a year earlier, and Toby was named after him. He had also died suddenly. Jim had died suddenly too. And I called my friend Becca, who was there for Toby's birth. She was at a ball game, her son's soccer game, like 2 hours away, and she immediately got in the car and started driving. She was at the house. She made it to my house before I did. And eventually they came in and said, we have to take him to Frankfurt. Anytime a child dies, has to go to the state office, has to get an autopsy from the state medical examiner. And they wrapped him up in his Elmo blanket and they left. Karen took me home. We actually went into a waiting room for me because we really thought I needed something for anxiety. But we waited so long for the doctor to come and see me that eventually I just walked out. I said, I don't want to stay here. I want to go home. So we just left. And when I got home, there were a lot of people at the house. And I walked into the kitchen and everybody stopped talking and just looked at me. And I walked through the living room and I looked down and his swing was still there. And I realized then that that was the only thing of his that I saw. I didn't see anything else. His other toys were gone. And later Mom told me that she and Ashley had gone around and they had picked up everything and put it in another room because they didn't want me to have to look at it as soon as I got home. And they'd missed the swing. And I just went upstairs. I got on Facebook and I made a post about it because I thought if I don't do it now, I'm not going to be able to do it later. I may never get out of bed again. I I woke up a little while later and one of my friends was there. She Pete worked with her too. Pete worked at a law office and she was the paralegal. She had a little boy with cancer. He was 5. But she had come to the house and she asked if I needed anything, and there were a bunch of women gathered around the bed. I'm sorry guys, I don't remember who you were. They were gathered around the bed and they wanted to do something for me. And I didn't want them to feel bad, so I said I'd eat some soup. I just tried to think of something they could do. So they went down and made me soup and I ate it. I don't remember the rest of that day. The only other thing I remember, and again, it's gonna be crazy, is Becca and Rob and their friend Deshay stayed, went to the grocery store, picked up groceries, and made supper. And in the middle of making it, they were making mashed potatoes, because that's my favorite food. Becca said, do you know where your potato peeler is? I can't find it. And I cried, and it was the first big tears I'd had all day. I cried because I didn't have a potato peeler, and I was embarrassed. No rhyme or reason you do this, none. I don't remember eating. The next few days were a blur. Mom came and sat on the edge of the bed at one point, and we talked about songs. She asked if we wanted our friend Kendall, who at the time was Wolfe County Superintendent, if we wanted him to sing, and I said yes. And she asked me what songs. She was like, do you want Amazing Grace? And I said no. That was too religious for me. I said I wanted Green Pastures, uh, Natalie Merchant's when they ring the golden bells, and Silent Night. And yes, I realized this was August, but the words of Silent Night just kept running through my mind because of how quiet it was that morning. You know, Silent Night's about it being really quiet and still, and then round yon virgin, mother and child, and sleep in heavenly peace. But that's not a Christmas song at all. That's a song about losing your baby. I made those decisions, but I didn't pick out the casket. She asked me if I wanted him buried at kind of the family cemetery or in Hazel Green, and I was really worried about that. I didn't know My heart's in Hazel Green, Wolf County, but Nana's buried at the family cemetery, and I didn't want him to be alone. I don't know anybody buried at the Hazel Green one, and I didn't want him to be by himself, so I picked the one in Menifee County. Pete went with Mom, and they met my dad there, and they did the whole thing with the funeral parlor. We knew the funeral parlor people. I mean, Wolf County, everybody knows everybody. They they took care of all those details. Mom did most of it. I didn't do a thing other than pick out the song. I mostly slept and watched TV. Family came from Texas. Family came from all over. Pete's dad flew in from England. His brother-in-law came down from Massachusetts. We had dozens of people there. They took care of Sam. I don't know what I did. Slept, watched TV. I look back and I see Facebook posts of me talking about things that were going on, but I don't remember making them. I do remember it was maybe that first night I was in bed and I was just laying there crying, holding on to Pete. He said, "Do you want me to go get Sam?" And I said, "Yes." And he went and got Sam and put him between us, and Sam slept between us for the next year. Couldn't let him go. And a few nights later, or it could have been a few weeks later, I don't know, I woke up in the middle of the night and I reached out and put my hand on Sam's chest and I couldn't feel him breathing. And I woke Pete up and I said, "I can't feel Sam breathing." And Pete sat up, and I guess he couldn't feel it either, and he picked Sam and started rocking him back and forth, going, "Sam, Sam." Sam woke up like, "What?" But that's how we lived for the next several years. We slept with our hands on each other's chests to make sure each other was breathing. I still wake up and find Pete's hand on my chest or on my back or on my neck feeling for a pulse. It's been 8 years and we still do it. I was relieved at the funeral, the visitation. When I walked in and I saw his body in the casket, I felt relief because um, the funeral was on Wednesday, Tuesday or Wednesday. He died Saturday morning. I had gone all that time without seeing him, and that was awful. And when I finally saw him, I felt a little bit of relief, like at least I can touch him. Waking up was horrible. I hated waking up in the morning the next year. It was awful. Because sometimes you would wake up and there would be like this split second where you're still kind of half asleep, where you could forget, you know. As soon as I'd wake up, I'd lay there and I'd think, "Oh, it's gonna be a good day." And then wham, I'd remember Toby is dead and I'd start crying. And it was complete anxiety. You know that feeling you get when you're sitting in a chair and it tips backwards and you think you're gonna fall? I lived with that feeling nonstop. Nonstop. That was my new normal. That's how I felt. It never went away. Nothing I did. Um, People asked me how I got through the funeral, how um how I was able to get up and talk about Toby. I said, well, somebody needed to speak for him, you know. Somebody needed to be talk for his benefit. I had to do that, or else other people who were at the funeral might not have known how special he was, or what he liked, or what he did. I had to tell him as much as I could. But other people came up and talked too. There's all kinds of people sharing stories about when he was born and him being at the writer's retreat, things like that. That was good. But people ask me, how did you get through the funeral? How did you? And honestly, I can't tell you because I wasn't completely there. Somebody, a very helpful friend, gave me something to help me through that time. Not quite illegal, but Um, it helped. And without it, I probably couldn't have even walked through the door. I rode in the hearse. The cemetery was almost an hour away, and we were going 15 miles an hour. And in my part of the world, if you pass a funeral procession, you stop your vehicle. And everybody stopped along the way. And I wanted to lean my head out the window and shout, "It's my son, and he's just a little boy." I wanted everybody to know. I wanted everybody to know how unfair and how awful it was. On the other hand, I was so completely out of it and not in my right mind that at one point we went past an abandoned house and I took a picture. That's what I do. I take pictures of old houses. It makes no sense, and that's what I tell people. You can't control your emotions and what you think and what you do. You can control what you do a little bit, but it wasn't me. After the funeral, we waited and they put him in the ground. I pulled some flowers, fresh flowers off the side of the grave, and I walked around and I gave one to everybody, and we threw them in. There's a song, Patty Griffin, called Long Ride Home, and it's about burying somebody. And the line says, "Someone dug a hole 6 long feet in the ground. I said goodbye to you and I threw my roses down." And that's what we did. And we stayed while they covered him up. And then we put the flowers and all the arrangements on top of the grave. We stayed the whole time. I wasn't leaving until he was covered and he was protected. My best friend Angelina was there. And when we were little, or 14, we used to walk around the old logging roads and we would sing Pam Tillis songs mostly. That's what we did when we were together. And when I heard that first clod of dirt hit his casket, oh my God, it felt like somebody was shooting me. And she put her arms around me and she covered my ears and said, "Don't listen, Becca, don't listen." But I could still hear it. So she started singing, maybe it was Memphis, and in between dances. And she sat there and sang until it was over so that I didn't have to listen to it. Her husband owned a restaurant in Richmond called Elvira's. It's an Italian restaurant. She goes, "Do you want Jose to make you something to eat tonight?" And I was like, and she, "Jose, you're fixing him lasagna." And he said, "Okay." Really good lasagna too. All the way back home, that Patty Griffin song was just going through my mind. When, with driving home, with me riding in this car, and you flying through the clouds. And the chorus is, "I've had some time to think about you and watch the sunset like a stone. I've had some time to think about you on the long ride home." And that's it. Nobody ever talks about the ride back after the funeral. I got home and there was a lot of people there. They brought a lot of food, which is what you do in Kentucky. Somebody dies. It looked really good and I was really hungry. So I made myself a plate and I sat down at the table. And then this girl, who was just a teenager from a flower shop, came in with a big arrangement. You could tell she was really nervous and feeling really awkward. And she stood there by me and she looked down and she said, "I'm sorry this happened. Things like this happen in my family all the time, and it's just something that you have to look over." And then she kind of stopped and she looked around, she set down the flowers and she left. And she went out the door and the whole room was quiet. There must have been 30 of us in there. And they were all looking at me, like holding their breath, like what was I going to say? And I go, so I'm supposed to overlook my dead child? And then we all laughed. I mean, it was so ridiculous. The whole situation was so ridiculous. We just laughed. And then I went to the bathroom and I threw up. And then I went to our pool room and I closed the door and I laid there and watched TV. Angelina came up and laid down with me on the couch and we talked about Teen Mom. We talked about stupid stuff till I fell asleep. People got really mad at me because eventually when my emotions kicked in, they turned to anger. And I was mad at everybody. Some people justifiably so. Some people made our situation worse. We had friends who got angry at us for still being in grief 2 months later. There was name calling on their part. Awful things were said. Those people, yeah, I was mad. And I talked about it on Facebook. And I named names. Other people got caught in the crossfire, and I feel really bad about that. Really bad. You have no idea. But I kept a grief blog, and I wrote exactly how I was feeling every day, and some of those feelings were good and some were not. But I let it all out, and honestly, it's the thing that kept me alive. Because I had zero history of self-harm before Toby died. But as the weeks went by, people kept telling me, "You look like you're doing really well," and they meant it as a positive. I took it as a negative. Inside, I was screaming. I was falling apart. But apparently from the outside, I looked fine. So I started cutting my arm because I wanted my outside to match my inside. I didn't want people to look at me and say that I looked good. I wanted them to know that I was in pain. People eventually went back to their own lives and we were left alone. It was just us. We had one or two friends who still came around, but mostly everybody had moved on. They couldn't be around us. We were too depressed, we were too angry, we were too emotional, and we were living proof that sometimes bad shit just happens, and some people couldn't handle that, and I can't say that I blame them. Because once Toby died, a whole other bad list of bad things started happening too. A lot. In fact, I wrote a book about it. It's called The Maple House. So many bad things that there are people in my life who legitimately believe that we are cursed or a demon is hanging around us. And I know that sounds funny, but within 4 weeks of his death, my dad had had 2 major heart attacks. My mom had a stroke. Pete's mother died. Pete lost his job. Yeah. By the end of the year, I was diagnosed with a rare disease. I had to have brain surgery. Dad had had another heart attack. Both of Pete's grandparents died. It was one thing after another, and it was awful. I wish I had done some things differently, but then again, you can't. There are no shortcuts in grief. Doctors never gave me medication to help me. I tried to set up counseling, but it fell through. And I just had to work through it. I did a lot of working through it with my blog. Iris, being born a year later, helped. It was awful. There are no at leasts when a child dies. There's nothing you can say that warrants an at least. At least he this or at least he that. There's no bright side. There is no silver lining. Could he have been saved if the doctor had taken me seriously a week before he died when I went in and showed him a videotape and said I thought he was having seizures? If they had acted on it right then, could he have lived? I don't know. If I had been awake, and with him. Could I have caught it and gotten him to the hospital in time? The doctors say no. The doctors say that we don't understand SIDS and that it's instantaneous death. I have since met parents who were holding their babies, and they were wide awake when they died. SIDS is a cause of death by exclusion, which means everything has been ruled out, including accidental suffocation, choking. It's all been ruled out, and they just don't know. Then they put SIDS on it. We don't know why he died. He could have had biotinidase deficiency like Iris, and he could have had a stroke from that. He could have had a Chiari malformation or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and had a heart attack. He could have had a seizure, an undiagnosed epilepsy, and died of that. We have no idea. Do I blame myself? Yeah, a lot. As illogical as it may be, as a mother, I do kind of think, well, if I'd been up with him, he wouldn't have died. If I'd been right there, I could have saved him. If I hadn't taken a shower, if I'd gone all the way into the bedroom, I don't know. I think about that every day. It'll drive you crazy. Grief is a really funny, weird thing. It never gets better. It never goes away. You change. You learn to live with the grief. It's like a intruder who breaks in on you and never leaves. You can't shoot it. You can't kick it out. You can't make it go away. You hate it. But you just have to live with it until eventually you almost become used to it. He was a really sweet child. He was perfect baby. I loved him very much. It's not it's not fair. 8 years later and we're still not back to where we were before he died. Difficult to work sometimes. Look, it's going on 4 in the morning and I can't sleep. It changes you. I can't believe I'm still married. Oh, child loss is one of the biggest reasons couples divorce. I don't know why we didn't. I don't know why we were able to work through it and others don't. We're not special. Maybe it's because it's all we had was each other and Sam. But that's what it was like to lose a child. And that was his death. I've spoken a lot about his life, but that was his death. And I hope that if you have suffered a child loss, then maybe hearing somebody else's story will make you feel not so alone, because it is really, really lonely. It is awfully, awfully lonely and isolating. And if you know someone who has lost a child, maybe will give you some insight onto how they might be feeling. I hope that I gave him a really good life, even though it was only 2 months. I gave him the best life that I could, and at least I can say I couldn't have done anything differently in his life. He did a lot in 2 months. That's the only at least I can say. And there isn't a day goes by that I don't think about him.